What was the turning point in regard to your history around drugs, alcohol, porn, and all that other stuff?
It wasn't until I got sober that I realised compromised consciousness. Kia ora whānau, and welcome to the inaugural episode of Men Speak, the podcast. I'm Stone James.
And I'm Rex Lovegrove.
And welcome. Nau mai ra rau mai. We are so happy to have you here. Men Speak is about bringing conversations to men and women to stimulate thought and inspire action. And in this first episode, Rex is going to interview me, and I might swing some questions his way. And then on our next episode, I'll interview Rex, and you guys can get to know us. So, kia ora, brother.
Beautiful, brother. I love the way you set the scene, mate. It's one of your superpowers, my bro.
Thank you.
But I know there was a time in your life that, you know, your superpower was somewhat dominant in relation to, let's say, addictions, challenges that you had. And from your perspective, what was the turning point in regard to your history around drugs, alcohol, porn, and all that other stuff that potentially hamstringed you from living a life you love? Eh?
The biggest turning point was when I realised that I was going outside of myself to validate my experience. So, and obviously I've had a fair bit of time to think about this now. If you'd asked me this question 3.5 years ago, my answer would be quite different. But the experience I've had of living sober, living porn-free for over 3 years, is realising that I was going outside of myself to be validated, to be accepted. And there's many genealogies or whakapapa to that experience, but the one of them was, being accepted by other people. I realised that my drinking was around being accepted from other people and validating my emotions through drinking. And the biggest thing, we've talked about this before, was when I was in a relationship with a person that was a severe addict, and I wanted them to get better. But I realised it was the universe. It was one of the first times that I really leaned into that mirror and understanding that what I'm seeing, experiencing, judging and perceiving is what I need. And it was like, far out. How could I expect that person to get sober, clean, live a life of purity and awareness if I wasn't prepared to? So that's when I really had to take responsibility for myself. And I put down the bottle, put down the drugs. The porn thing took a little bit longer because I was still looking for that emotional validation. It wasn't until I got sober that I realised that I still had that. And look, I still have those compulsions of going outside of myself. It's not porn, alcohol, or drugs these days. It might be an emotion or needing to be heard in a certain way, relying on someone else's words to confirm my state of being rather than experiencing my state of being.
Beautiful, brother. I've interviewed prior, and one of the key questions that I put to you, and it just feels obvious to share this, to state this. If you could look that 16-year-old, that 18-year-old, that 20-year-old in the eye now, and share some tongue, some treasure, some advice in relation to living a life you love, what would you solely say to those young men?
I would say, become what you seek, practice what you speak, and walk the path with your own 2 fucking feet. Become what you seek is being that which you desire rather than going outside of yourself. And then practice what you speak. A big thing that shifted me with this journey of awareness was I was giving advice to other people in my life, but I wasn't taking it. So practice what you speak. To often young guys think they know it all, but they're not actually applying it. They're not actually doing what they think they're doing. They're not actually taking action. And then that comes to the last bit, walk the path with your own 2 effing feet. I would put the fucking feet, the swearing in there to stimulate my younger version, because they'd be like, oh, it'd catch their attention. Walk the path with your own 2 feet. Like, you go and do what's required to get there. Not just talking about it or imagining it, actually embodying it. And for me, that was like someone that was powerful, that was strong, that was disciplined, that because I always had that pull to be in my own realm, to be of my own kind, to be unique. But I didn't really lean into it because I was going for that external validation.
So based on everything that you've gone through and the place you are in now, what's the purpose of your life? What are you meant to do? What are you going to bring to the world in relation to your heart?
Thanks for the beautiful question, Rex. One of them is to inspire 1 million men and women to get sober and or stay sober for life. Sobriety is something that I'm so passionate about because it was the foundation for me to untap a new level of awareness about my experience as a human being and to move away from externally validating my emotions, whether they were happy, sad, mad, bad or glad, to actually be present for my emotions. It's something I'm working on now, but that is one of my absolute missions, is to awaken men like I was, who were overweight, on the piss every week and thinking that's as good as it gets. Like I couldn't imagine when I was 30, I couldn't imagine a life without alcohol. I just didn't know it was possible. Every setting I was around, I was using alcohol to validate myself, to feel either good or bad or angry or happy. So I didn't actually think it was possible to live without it. So that's my mission. That's one of my main number one missions, is to promote sobriety. I want to make sobriety look sexy. I want to make sobriety look inspiring to you folks out there, that it's like, yes, that's what I've been looking for. And the other one is bringing people back in touch with meditation, with their spirituality, what I would call a connection to God, and which is something I was so afraid of as a young man. I was really brought up in a non-religious environment with no heed to any kind of higher power, and that's no fault of anyone's. That's just the way the modern Western world is propagating itself, is to divorce men from God or the creator consciousness, whatever you want to call it. When you look at those things, alcohol, porn, gaming, movies, violence, social media, really is divorcing a person from divinity, their true nature. Our true nature is divine.
I feel you. What's coming up for me in relation to what you've just noted, what you've just said so soulfully, my brother, so soulfully, is that you were involved in drugs, alcohol. There's a whole lot of habits that weren't so self-serving, but they were comfortable in relation to the discomfort of the comfort, if that makes any sense. And so what have you done? So what are you doing now? What have you replaced these habits with? Because everything is a habit. Everything is a discipline. It just depends on where our focus is in relation to where our heart is situated in that moment. So what are you doing? What have you replaced alcohol with?
Yeah. The biggest one is meditation, a daily meditation. And for me, it's as simple as waking up. Well, I guess for me, I perceive it as simple. And I know that my old self perceived this as very complex, but meditation, spending time in silent reflection. And for me, that means waking up, and the first thing I do in the morning is I go into meditation. And it's just simply sitting in silent reflection with a focal point. I use my third eye as the focal point, and that gives me the ability to check in with what's going on, because the brain is so active. Like, I'm a human being. Just remember that, guys, I'm a human being. And so I'm experiencing all these different things: anger, regret, jealousy, joy, happiness, excitement, all of those things. And my goal is to become more and more aware of what I'm experiencing, and does it align? So, yeah, and the big thing that helped me to get through stopping drinking was I started a meditation practice, and then I would even have one beer at night, and that would really interfere with my flow in the morning. It would interfere with my ability to get into silence, because my mind would just be going nuts. So meditation is a huge pillar. The other one is journaling, is writing down, scripting. I call it manifestation affirmation. It's writing down that which I wish to experience as though it's already happened, but like doing it as a discipline. Like I've done that for 3 years non-stop. Might have had like 3 or 4 days off doing that, but that's one of the foundational habits that's in direct contrast with alcohol, drugs, pornography, because those things are outside of the experience and they manipulate the brain or they compromise consciousness. Whereas this other thing gives clarity to consciousness when you're writing down, programming your thoughts through intentional words. It changes your life. Like it really changes how you perceive reality and how you experience it, because you're priming your brain for an experience and you start looking for that. But when I was under the influence, I couldn't prime myself for anything. It was like, where's the cheapest alcohol? How quick can I get it to me? Who's going to invite me out next? Who's got the drugs? Where's this porn video that's going to fulfill my need? You know? So yeah, those are the 2 crucial habits, the meditation and the journaling. And I probably should mention fitness as well, like fitness to oscillating the body in a way. Like I use fitness as a tool for spiritual acquisition, for spiritual expansion. Like when I'm going through a workout, I'm thinking, how can I expand my being? How can I use this to pivot my awareness, especially when I get into that zone where I want to give up, where I want to think, man, I've had enough. I want to explore that space and what's bringing that up. Sometimes it's obviously necessary to not go to the extremes, but a lot of the training I do would probably be regarded as extreme. But I am learning to have rest days too. So like example, I was up Paritutu Rock the other day on, was it Saturday? It was massive, pouring down with rain, howling with wind, and I ran up there in my shorts because that makes me feel alive. That cold water, being in the elements, exposure. Some people call it exposure therapy, to put a fancy spin on it, just getting outside in your shorts. But that helped me to feel alive and start to feel my body getting into the cold.
Beautiful. You mentioned the cold, and I know you're no stranger to the elements, and you referenced that, my bro. You surfed over the winter time for 4 winters. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Tell me the learnings, tell me the experience, the sensations that occurred associated with that.
Well, I want to quickly give a quick backstory. This was actually one of the foundations of how I started Stone Thrower Health and Fitness, because I was doing this cold immersion. I did a winter in board shorts, and I thought, this is amazing. Like the exhilaration, the focus, the fear, the feeling within the body when you're really pushed to your limit. So I did 1 winter, and the feelings, like you say, to answer your question, the feelings are challenge. Like when I was going to the beaches and knowing that I was going to go out in board shorts, I could feel my body really start to prepare. I would start to feel really warm inside my stomach. That's when I knew I was going to have a longer session, that my body was on board. Other times it was a battle with the fear, and I could feel that the fear pulling at me, compromising that confidence. But when I was out there, it really made me think, why the fuck am I out here? Like, why am I in the cold in the middle of winter in Taranaki, New Zealand, and it's a blaring, gusting southeasterly blowing right into my kidneys, which are just out of the water. My whole body's wet and the wind's blowing on me, which takes the chill factor down many degrees. Why am I doing this? Like, am I what's the word called? Sociopath? No, what's the word? Someone that's seeking pain for pleasure.
Yeah, I feel you.
I can't think of the word, but but am I doing this masochist? Am I a masochist? So it really forced me to go deeper into why am I doing this? And I was doing it because I wanted to experience more. I wanted to know, were there more layers to my capability as a human being, and why? And it was like an answer to that drinking, like, how could I seek more within myself? And that environment made sense to me, and I got inspired by Wim Hof and all his documentaries. I was binge watching all the Wim Hof documentaries on YouTube, and I really wanted to go on one of his retreats, and I thought, far out, why don't I just go surfing? And while I'm waiting for a wave, that'll be my Wim Hof retreat, and I can just pretend I'm there. Because, you know, when you're surfing, you're often waiting for waves for sometimes 10, 15 minutes. There might not be a wave. So I took that into a wānanga state and was thinking, what would Wim Hof be doing in this moment? You know, that I practice on my breathing and really get into why was I there. So it was a real tool to go inward to meet new parts of myself. And to really acknowledge Wim Hof. He puts it out there in such a fun and challenging way. You know, one of his statements is, breathe, motherfucker, you know? So it's like, and I kept thinking, and he always says this too, if I can do it, you can do it. And I started to think about that, you know, like what if I could go for this next winter? And then 2 guys in the surfing community took their lives in April 2022, I think it was 2022. And that's when I started to publicize what I was doing, because I thought, how could guys, you know, surfing's meant to be like the holy grail of the modern spiritual journey. You know, you're out with the ocean, man, and you're in tune and you're having fun and your endorphins are going up and you're being fulfilled and you're in nature. So why are these guys taking their lives still? Because they were both really good surfers. I'd been out and seen those guys surfing. Didn't know them on a personal level, but I thought, what were they missing? You know, like what could have they learned or known that may have shifted their perspective to stay alive? And then I was like thinking, then I was like, man, I've got to share this what I've experienced through the cold water. I want to document what I'm doing to inspire other guys to use the cold to help shift their perspective. So then I started publicizing it. And this is going on a bit of a tangent from your original question, but I feel like it's relevant. And that's when I started, you know, when the surf wasn't so good, I would just train on the beach. I've always loved being on the beach and bare feet and being connected in. And so I started doing that more. And that tied in with my meditation and getting up early and my breath work. And then the beach training really I just started feeling so powerful. You know, down at the beach alone, just screaming my lungs out at 5:30 in the morning, no one around. It just really made me feel so fucking powerful, and it was just it transcended what surfing was doing for me. The surfing was fun and cool, and it was really exciting with the going out of the board shorts. It was also very difficult and quite stagnant. You know, at times I would be sitting there waiting, like really cold, and a few times I took it right to the edge, where I was just like jackhammering with shivers, like really pre-hypothermic, and which is not ideal. You know, like that kind of training I know can put me into I didn't really want to compromise my health for what? Just to be a hero, you know? So I did take it to some really extreme edges. And then I realized the beach training, the fitness was what was really, really giving me feeling mana, like feeling invigorated. And I was like, man, this is what I think those guys needed, was to feel powerful, to feel that they could overcome fear, to feel that they could move their body and be strong, that they could really bring themselves into a point of focus. So that's where Stone Thrower Health and Fitness was born. And that was born out of the cold and having those experiences.
Awesome, my brother. Absolutely beautiful. What's come up for me is that you talked about the discipline and pushing your body and going into the layers, the sensations, and seeing if there was more there. But what was really apparent as you were speaking was you also went into vulnerability, my bro. Deep vulnerability in relation to not only pushing your body, but just sinking into who you are outside of what you thought and felt your limitations were. So on that note, can you sort of, add some magic to what you've already built for the audience, for us, for me? Because it's beautiful, cordial, man. It's absolutely angel-driven as far as I'm concerned. But it's that vulnerability that I'm curious about, and I can see it in your eyes. It's that. Because vulnerability is strength. And part of the reason why you're your colleagues, your surfing acquaintances took their life because of their vulnerability or their lack of wanting to open themselves up to the vulnerability, to a choice outside of what they thought and felt that they knew in relation to their life in general. And so we need more men like you. So please, if you feel inspired to share that is on your heart, it's that vulnerability that I'm curious about.
Well, I think the cold water has a lot to do with learning to be vulnerable, because in the cold you can die. And when you go out and to paddle out onto a surf break in the middle of winter, you could die. You could have a surfing accident, but when you're doing it in board shorts in the middle of winter, the chances of getting hypothermia can take you out in 3 minutes. So you've got to be very focused, but you've also got to be aware that you're putting yourself into vulnerability, that you're actually you're putting yourself into this very compromisable position where you could be taken out from your own stupidity or your own ego if you push yourself too far. And the natural process of going through that and leaning into vulnerability was when then I started running men's events, men's retreats. And that's probably where those deeper layers of vulnerability come through, is when men get together in a sacred, safe container. There's no cameras like there is here, but you're going into a sacred space where you share. And that was where I really started leaning into vulnerability as a leader, going, this is where I'm at. These are my problems. But it's different to it's not a counselling session. You're just there to be accountable to your own self of whatever level you want to go to. But for me I had to get vulnerable with myself, which was accepting who I was at a certain point. And that's still something that I've got to get vulnerable about, is about where are my strengths, where are my weaknesses. And often those weaknesses come from the strengths. The strengths get so strong and powerful that they then become a weakness because you've overcompensated. But vulnerability is a strength. It's one of those challenging things that it's not always straightforward. A lot of the guys that have been on my retreats, we talk about sharer's remorse. You go on this retreat, you tell these guys all your deepest, darkest secrets, and then you go home and you have this sharer's hangover or sharer's remorse. And that's just getting used to being vulnerable, because it's so foreign for us. We're always holding up our shields and our strength because we've had to as men. We're born from violence, from all these intergenerational conflicts between races, countries, kingdoms and governments. So we inherently know that vulnerability is not actually safe to be vulnerable. But it's shifting. It's shifting through conversations like this and through practice of first being vulnerable with yourself in order to build trust to be vulnerable with someone else. Yeah.
Beautiful. Sovereignty. What's your take on sovereignty in relation to vulnerability? Because I think they hold hands.
Sovereignty is a very important topic, and it's self-sovereignty is what the opposite of sovereignty is, like being controlled, I would say. That's probably the starting point for me to answer that, is the opposite of sovereignty is being controlled by an entity, a corporation, government, maybe rules, a relationship. Your own mind can become the controller. We can cripple our own sovereignty. Sovereignty is about really taking responsibility for one's own choices, desires, thoughts, and being aware of them. That's what meditation has taught me about sovereignty. Yeah, I know you've got some whakaaro on sovereignty. I'd love to flip the mirror here and to pose that same question to you, brother, about sovereignty, what sovereignty means to you. And I'd love to know how that holds hands. Secondly, how that holds hand with vulnerability.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Stone. Well, vulnerability and sovereignty, from my perspective, does hold hands, because there is a requirement, a natural requirement, to be honest with oneself in relation to where they're at and where they want to be. And you spoke into detail of that. And it's the ability to actually look at your life from a place of presence and compassion and forgive yourself anyway for in relation to any perceived hiccups along the way, because it's part of the human experience. One of our spells, from my perspective, is that the need to be perfect, the need to get everything right. And I'm not against high standards, but when perfection becomes a shackle around one's ankles, then you never get anything done. And one of the ways of being sovereign is your ability to actually allow yourself to experience the fruit of life. And part of the fruit of life might be actually grazing your knees on occasions. It might be getting out on that surfboard in the middle of winter. I'm not saying that's my thing, but obviously it was for you, and it had great benefit in relation to your vulnerability and sovereignty. So sovereignty to me and vulnerability is a true choice, doing what we really love rather than what's expected. There's many of us experiencing what I consider a prison and never walked into a prison cell. Never walked into a prison cell, and yet they're carrying around this cage called this job I hate, this loveless relationship, this ill health, this financial burden that I'm carrying. That's maximum security. And vulnerability is the ability to actually name that, be honest with yourself, and then lean into your heart. What would I heart love? And take one step into leaning into that you prefer, and hello, you hug sovereignty, you hug that freedom that is your divine nature, and you spoke about that. You embrace that vulnerability and your inability to be perfect, which is perfect. So that's sovereignty for me. And one of the tonga out of many tongas that I love in regard to our relationship, our friendship, building this union, is that it allows me to actually be vulnerable and support you in your vulnerability. But in doing so, we create a strength where we become powerful rather than fragile through the art of language and aroha. So, yeah, brother. So thank you for that question.
Yeah, my pleasure. And what about the self? Because you've been into the cold too. What does that reveal to you about yourself, and how did you get into it too? I'd like to know how you got into the cold.
Okay. Well, I was experiencing some physical discomfort, and I was averaging around 2 to 3 hours sleep a night through a ringing in my ear. And it was getting to the stage where when I say recently, probably about 3-4 years ago, it was getting to the stage where I actually didn't want to be here, because the quality of my life wasn't full of the fruit that I prefer to taste in relation to the ringing. It was like a fire truck going off. It's outrageous. And I'm grateful that I didn't act on the frustration and the aggression that was building up over that period, because as you know, I have a history. It's a past history, but it's still a history. It's still a whakapapa there in regard to aggression. And with the ringing in the ears, it was stimulating this bear inside of me. And I noticed myself in the mirror, and I thought, I haven't seen you for a while. Kia ora. And it was that bear. And the bear was frustrated, tired, and hungry to be fed in relation to that aggression that unfortunately or fortunately is, again, part of the whakapapa, part of a past life, part of a past experience. And I thought, whoa, that was sort of like the hello, just in that moment. And so I slowed everything down, and you made reference to meditation. And my process is probably similar to yours as well. I just started to breathe, and I just let go of everything that I perceived to be a problem, just by breathing and softening, noticing everything, but breathing and softening and softening and softening. And then I imagined a circle, and I stepped into the circle, and I asked this question. And in this circle, everything that I needed to know in relation to living a life I love would be exposed. And I asked that question, what's the obvious action in relation to living a life I love? Not getting rid of this ringing, not trying to pacify the bear. What could I do to live a life I love? Health and vitality. And I saw this shower head came up. And I went, fuck off. Nah. Because I know what that implied. But I couldn't get rid of the vision. So I went into the shower, cold shower. Fuck. I turned into a little boy in seconds. Right? In seconds. It was that cold. Because I live out in the country and the water's ice. And I'm going, oh, like this. And hello, the ringing subsided. What? The ringing subsided. And I got hooked. And it was my intuition, my vulnerability, and my desire to be sovereign from that I was experiencing in that moment. And that was extreme discomfort. But rather than trying to fix it, what I did is I opened myself up to possibilities associated with living a life of health and vitality. And in doing so, voila, I got a clear message. I followed that message. And that's what you're big on, is implementation, you see. It's all very well being intuitive. But if you're not willing to take the action, Carl, kidding yourself, huh? So I took the action and I started sleeping that night. I slept for 7 hours, first time in months, 7 hours, boom, boom. My relationship started to change because I wasn't emanating that aggression. So people were starting to come to me, and I have a heart that is related to, holding space and supporting those that, require support, or at least mirroring what's possible in regard to living a life you love, because that's one of my 4 core questions. My choices, you see, is living a life I love, being the prominent creative force in my life, and living, health and vitality, and being living my true nature and purpose. Those are my poles. You see, my pose, that's what I build my foundation, my house on. And I ask those questions every morning, and I feel into them, and then I take the obvious action. And the obvious action was to actually join up and connect with you, bro.
Yeah, I want to just ask you another question about that. The cold, that's a really profound story and really inspirational. So, whānau, there's a nugget there to really think about stepping into the cold. Because that's the first time I've heard that story, and it's powerful stuff, man. It's very powerful. But a thing that really caught my attention was when you talked about the little boy came out in you as a older man, or elder, kaumātua. I'd like you to describe that. Because this is the thing about us men, we get so caught up to never show that vulnerability. But for you to explain that in a way, I mean, I've had similar things, but I'd love to delve into that for our listeners to think about how do we know when our little boy inside of us is being rattled, or how do we get into a space where we become aware of that? Because often it can manifest as just F the world, or get totally overwhelmed, panic attack. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, thank you. And you're correct that these are my thoughts. Other people will have different perspectives on this, but this is what's worked for me personally, is that I've come to realize that my feelings, even though they're valid to me, they're not necessarily true.
Could you just repeat that? I think that's important.
Well, my feelings are valid to me. It's not that I'm not feeling them, I'm feeling them, but they're not necessarily valid. And what I mean by that is that they're often triggered by a subconscious need to keep safe, based on an emotion that was never given the room to air and express itself fully. So it just recycles itself in a manner in which prevents me from leaning into a life of health and fitness, leaning into a life of being living my true nature and purpose, being the prominent creative force in my life and loving my life, because it never felt safe enough to be fully expressive of who I was, because we have an education system and we have family members that have also been traumatized, doing their best to keep safe in an environment that isn't always user-friendly. So when I experience trauma, what happened is the emotion came to the surface and the emotion got shut down, and then I made it personal. I made the assumption that what I had to say wasn't valid. What I had to say wasn't respected. And if I dare push the boundaries on that, I will be physically punished. So to be speaking my truth in relation to a moment of emotional disorder, the association was more emotional disorder. So I got punished for being Rex. And we all have. And we spend, and you've made reference to this, we spend, some of us anyway, multiple times getting counselled. And there's some great counsellors out there. I've had counselling. I'm not saying you shouldn't. What I'm saying, if you're going to a counsellor and still dealing with the same issue after 10 sessions, you either find another counsellor, and this is my perspective, find another counsellor that will help you lean towards a life you love and express that has hamstringed you between what you prefer and what's become a custom in relation to that cell, that prison cell that we carry around with us. And I love what you said before about going surfing and all those things, because there's a sense of creativity in there. And what happens is when, I've noticed it with kids, and I've noticed it, especially the young ones, where they're enjoying themselves, they're just wide-eyed, innocent, just having fun, and all of a sudden, a swing smacks them in the face. And if a big person isn't, let's say, present enough and doesn't hold space and allow them to emotionally express and then encourage them back on that swing, they associate happiness with pain. So let's not get too happy.
Oh, okay. And I just want to question there, like allowing them to express themselves. So what do you think a way that a parent could nurture a child? So you saying, because I know as a parent in the past, I've done all I can to shush them up, not to purposefully dull their emotion, but you want them to sort of be okay. So are you saying like they need to cry, they need to experience the anguish of it, or how do you frame that?
To varying degrees. To varying degrees, because the subconscious is picking up information constantly and consistently, right? But what happens when someone gets traumatized, and we've all done this, experienced this, is that our breathing changes. You know this. And when a child cries, there's a certain rhythm of breath. It's based on suppression and restriction. Now, in that time, they obviously require comfort and a need to feel safe and to actually move through that association in relation to the way they're breathing. And to do that is to re-regulate their breath by starting to breathe for them and with them, by holding their hand. Looking them in the eye in the most loving manner possible and starting to breathe and re-regulate their emotion. Re-regulate the emotion. And in doing so, they recenter themselves, and there's a good chance they'll get back on their swing. And their association will be more related to the hero's journey and saying, "Hey, I've just pacified my dragon. Now I'm experiencing the crown jewels of experience by actually doing that I love." And it's nobody's fault. And there's plenty of people who have a different facade on this. But what I've come to realize is, when I'm feeling something, and that was your question, when I'm feeling something, I just pause for a moment, because I think, whoa, I'm feeling something. And if I act on this feeling, my history would suggest 9 times out of 10, I'm going to have a car crash. And so I start to regulate my breathing, and I do whatever's required in relation to actually recalibrating myself before I step back into what's required in regard to making a choice. And I never make a choice based on my emotional response. And I'm not talking about feeling joyful and all the rest of it, because let's face it, I mean, more of that, please. But it's that need to either run or to fight. And amongst that, that's your indicator that there's something distorted in relation to your emotional response to that. And you'll often see it I see it in the workplace all the time, where someone will say something and all of a sudden you've got World War III. And I'm thinking, oh man, you've associated that emotion with who you think you are, and it's distorted because there wasn't somebody available to you in a time of need to actually allow you to regulate your emotions and then get back on that horse or that swing. And for me, it's that simple.
So it is that simple, but how do we coach ourselves or other men to learn that? Because it is a simple concept, but like you say, you see it all the time. So how does that guy that's flowing off the handle learn to recognise it?
Well, there's multiple ways you can address that, but I'm really curious, how do you address it? How do you deal with it? I mean, I'm happy to answer.
Okay, yeah, okay.
This is a partnership here.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a great question, and it's a challenging one because I still face my daily challenges, daily demons or distractions. It comes back to awareness. And it's what I talked about at the start of our corridor today, having awareness of what am I doing, having awareness of when the emotion flares up. But the only way I could do that was to reduce the distractions, to start to go into what have I actually been through, where am I operating from when I wake up. So when I got into that meditation practice, it's like, wow, there's so much noise in here. There is so much noise in here. This person did this to me and that's my fault, and she did that to me. And blaming external. That was the whole thing about the alcohol. The alcohol was always an external validation of how I felt, so I didn't have to take responsibility for it. So it comes back to that process of getting sober, not just from alcohol, but getting sober from releasing the blaming other people to build my awareness.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do you reduce, let's say, the possibility of blaming yourself
for a past thing in a moment of...
Yeah, well, any situation occurred. Like, I hear what you're saying in regard to, your process, blaming others, but we do have a tendency, especially men, blaming ourselves too in our own...
Yeah, that's a work in progress for me, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think it's a continual unpacking, and gratitude is a practice that I have. Some days I'm better at it than others, depending on where I'm at or how tired I am. Like you spoke about having the lack of sleep, and then your bear came out.
Yeah.
So that's a big one I'm working on at the moment personally, is getting enough sleep, because I'm so driven to get this message out to you out there, whānau, and to help these other men, as I do have to remember to help myself, to regulate myself. Yep. So for that, it comes back to like quality sleep, quality kai, getting those basics right, being hydrated. Then I can understand things rather than blaming myself, being prepared for the challenges that are coming. And the self-blame relates into what you talked about as growing up as a child, where I'll give an example of someone I worked with once that I was supporting with, is we traced something back to the way that their mother had looked at them. And the mother was just doing their best, and they wanted that person as a child to just shut up and be quiet, to not embarrass them.
Yeah.
But it was only because of the conditioning that mother had.
Yeah.
But it had affected this person for a very long time. So I'm going through that process all the time. There's little things that come up for me and go, oh, shoot, I wasn't expecting that I would still holding on to that. Or if I have a point of tension with my partner, it's often going back to a previous suppressed experience, like you talked about, when a child is experiencing someone and it's not safe to be themselves, but then they're taking on that blame. So it really comes back to unpacking that, and that's an ongoing process for me.
Beautiful, bro.
Yeah,
absolutely beautiful. The world's a better place for the choices that you're making, I can assure you on that, mate.
Likewise, brother. Nice.
Nice.
Well, that feels like a pretty good place to land the spaceship. Thanks for joining us today, Whānau, and drop in the comments where you're watching from, what part of the world you're watching this from, and what resonated with you the most. Was there a line, a concept, or maybe a word or something that the brother Rex here has shared, or myself, and we'd love to hear from you, because in the next episode, we're going to kick the ball into Rex's half. I know we've danced around a bit, but that's the nature of this process. But we'll definitely start by unpacking some of your stories and wisdom and ideas and things like that.
Beautiful, my bro. Beautiful. Yeah.
Cheers, brother.
Cheers.
Ka kite anō.
Kia ora.